The Galactic Council chamber stretched across 3 kilometers of polished obsidian floor, its walls lined with viewing screens showing thousands of member worlds. Ambassador Thelrax of the Zorvathi Empire stood at the central podium, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically as he addressed the assembled representatives. "The humans have rejected our invitation for the 7th time," Thelrax announced, his voice carrying through the chamber's advanced acoustics. "They claim they need no governance beyond their own primitive systems." Murmurs rippled through the crowd of aliens. Some species chittered in amusement, while others hissed in disapproval. The humans had been discovered only 3 cycles ago, a young species barely beginning to explore their local star cluster. By galactic standards, they were infants. High Counselor Mirinth, a being of pure crystalline structure that refracted light into rainbow patterns, spoke next. "Their refusal is unprecedented. Every species we have contacted has eagerly joined our collective within 1 cycle. The benefits are obvious: shared technology, protection, resources, and guidance." "Perhaps they do not understand what they are refusing," suggested diplomat Karesh, whose tentacles swayed as she spoke. "We should send a demonstration fleet. Not to threaten, but to show them the magnificence of what they could join." The council agreed. Within days, a fleet of 200 vessels departed for the human home system. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, some measuring 50 kilometers in length. They carried gifts, treaties, and most importantly, a show of overwhelming power that had convinced countless civilizations to join peacefully. Admiral Vexthar commanded the fleet from his flagship, the Eternal Dominance. As they approached the solar system's edge, his tactical officer reported something unusual. "Admiral, we are detecting thousands of objects throughout this system. Satellites, stations, ships, far more than our initial surveys indicated." Vexithar examined the readings with his primary eyes while his secondary eyes reviewed the fleet formations. "Impossible. Our scouts reported a species barely capable of reaching their 4th planet. These readings suggest activity throughout their entire star system." "The data is accurate, sir. And Admiral, we are receiving a transmission." A human face appeared on the main screen. The creature looked remarkably similar to several other species in the galaxy, a bipedal mammalian form with bilateral symmetry. But something in its eyes caught Vexithar's attention. A sharpness. An intensity. "Greetings," the human said in perfectly accented galactic standard. "I am Fleet Admiral Chen of the United Earth Space Command. You are entering restricted space. Please state your intentions." Vexthar was taken aback by the audacity. This primitive species was challenging a council fleet. He decided to be magnanimous. "We come bearing an invitation to join the Galactic Council. We bring gifts and offer membership in the greatest civilization the galaxy has ever known." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "We have reviewed your previous invitations. The answer remains no. Please reverse course and exit our system." "You misunderstand," Vexithar replied, allowing a hint of steel into his voice. "This is not truly a choice. Every species joins the council eventually. Those who refuse at first always change their minds once they see what they face alone in the cosmos." "We understand perfectly," Chen said. "You want us to surrender our sovereignty, submit to your laws, and integrate into your systems. We've studied your council thoroughly. We know how it operates." Vexithar felt his confidence waver slightly. "How could you possibly have studied us? We only revealed ourselves 3 cycles ago." A slight smile crossed Chen's face. "Did you really think you were the first aliens we encountered? We've known about the council for 40 years. We've been watching, learning, preparing." The transmission ended abruptly. Vexthar's tactical display suddenly lit up with warnings. Ships were appearing throughout the system. Not hundreds, but thousands. They emerged from behind asteroids. Uncloaked near gas giants rose from planetary surfaces. Each one was smaller than council vessels, crude by comparison, but there were so many. "Admiral, we count over 3,000 vessels," his tactical officer reported, voice trembling. "And those are just the ones we can see. Sensor readings suggest many more in stealth." Vexthar had commanded fleets for 30 cycles. He had participated in 17 integration campaigns against resistant species. He knew what overwhelming force looked like. This wasn't it. This was something else. This was a trap that had been waiting for them. "Open a channel to the human flagship," he ordered. When Chen's face reappeared, Vexthar chose his words carefully. "Perhaps we were hasty. The council values independent thought. We can certainly discuss terms that would preserve your autonomy. You're not listening, Chen replied calmly. We don't want your counsel. We don't want your trade. We don't want your protection. We want you to leave our space and never return uninvited. And if we refuse? Vexthar knew the answer but needed to hear it. Then we'll make you leave. One of Vexthar's officers spoke up from his station. Admiral, they cannot possibly defeat us. Our shields alone could withstand anything they could generate. Our weapons could destroy planets. They are primitives with crude ships. Chen evidently heard this through the open channel. You're right about one thing. We can't match your technology. But your technology was developed by a civilization that hasn't fought a real war in 10,000 years. Ours was perfected in conflicts that spanned our entire planet. We've had 2 world wars, countless regional conflicts, and we've spent the last 40 years preparing for you. Something launched from one of the human vessels. Vexthar's crew barely had time to identify it as a missile before it struck one of the fleet's smaller escorts. The shield held, as expected, but then the missile exploded in a way that made Vexthar's blood freeze. The blast wasn't thermal or kinetic. It was electromagnetic, a pulse that overloaded the shield generators and fried every circuit on the ship in an instant. The vessel went dark and began drifting. That was a warning, Chen said. Every ship in our fleet carries weapons designed specifically to counter yours. We've studied your shield frequencies, your hull compositions, your tactical doctrines. We know how you fight because you always fight the same way. You haven't needed to innovate in millennia. Vexthar stared at the dead ship on his displays. One shot. One primitive missile had crippled a vessel that had taken decades to build. And there were thousands of human ships out there, each carrying who knew how many such weapons. We will report this to the Council, Vexthar said, struggling to maintain his composure. They will not be pleased. Report whatever you like, Chen replied. But understand this. Humanity claims this star system and every system within 50 light-years as our sovereign space. Any Council vessel that enters without permission will be treated as hostile. We don't want war, but we've been preparing for it since we learned you existed. The choice is yours. The transmission ended. Vexthar looked around his bridge at his crew's frightened faces. He had 2 choices: retreat and face humiliation, or attack and risk his entire fleet against an enemy that had clearly been planning this confrontation for decades. He chose survival. All ships reverse course. Maximum speed. We returned to Council space. As the fleet turned away, Vexthar watched the human vessels on his sensors. They didn't pursue. They didn't gloat. They simply held their positions, watching silently as the Council fleet retreated. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Vexthar had encountered a species that truly frightened him. Not because of their weapons or their numbers, but because of what they represented. A civilization that had looked at the galaxy's greatest power and decided they would rather stand alone than kneel. The Council chamber erupted into chaos when Vexthar finished his report. Representatives from 1,000 worlds shouted over each other, their translation devices creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. High Counselor Miranth had to activate the chamber's suppression field 3 times before order was restored. This is unacceptable, declared Ambassador Thelrax, his 4 arms crossed in a gesture of absolute refusal. A species of primitives cannot be allowed to defy the Council. If we permit this, others might follow their example. Counselor Indara, whose species had been among the Council's founders 8,000 years ago, spoke with measured caution. Perhaps we should consider their position. They ask only to be left alone. The galaxy is vast. We can grant them their space. Absolutely not, Thelrax snapped. The Council's authority is absolute. If we show weakness now, our entire structure could collapse. We have maintained peace for 10 millennia because everyone understands that resistance is futile. Miranth's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated deep thought. Vexthar, explain again how a single primitive missile disabled one of our ships. The Admiral's report had been detailed, but he elaborated. The weapon generated an electromagnetic pulse specifically tuned to our shield frequency. When I questioned my engineers, they admitted that our shield technology hasn't been updated in 3,000 years. Why would it be? No one has challenged it in living memory. A representative from the Korth Dominion, a species known for their military expertise, leaned forward. And their numbers? You confirmed 3,000 ships? At minimum, Vexthar replied. Possibly twice that. And Admiral Chen suggested they had been preparing for 40 years. If they discovered us that long ago and we had no idea, what else might they have accomplished? The chamber fell silent as this implication settled over the assembly. The Council's intelligence network was supposed to be comprehensive. The idea that a primitive species had been observing them undetected for 4 decades was deeply unsettling. Diplomat Karesh proposed a different approach. What if we imposed sanctions? Cut them off from any species that might trade with them. Isolate them completely until they understand the futility of independence. They already isolated themselves, Vexthar pointed out. Admiral Chen made it clear they want nothing from us. How do you sanction a civilization that asks only to be ignored? Thelrak stood abruptly. Then we use force. A proper military campaign, not a demonstration fleet. We assemble an armada that cannot be defied. We show them what true power looks like. Myrinth's colors shifted to dark red, indicating strong disagreement. And if they resist? If they've prepared defenses against our technology? We could lose thousands of ships and millions of crew members. And for what? To force a single species into membership they don't want? For the principle, Thelrax insisted. For the very foundation of everything we have built. The debate continued for hours, but no consensus emerged. Finally, Myrinth made an executive decision. We will send an intelligence team, a small, stealthy vessel to observe these humans and assess their true capabilities. Once we understand what we face, we can make an informed decision. 3 weeks later, the intelligence ship Silent Observer entered human space, using the Council's most advanced stealth technology. Its crew of 30 specialists were the best the galaxy had to offer. They were confident, professional, and certain they could slip past any primitive detection grid. They lasted 6 hours. Captain Drenash had positioned his ship in the outer asteroid belt, using a large rock formation for cover while his sensors mapped human activity. What they found was staggering. Captain, there are mining operations on 70% of the asteroids in this belt, his science officer reported. Automated facilities extracting resources and processing them on site. The scale is unprecedented for such a young civilization, and they've built something around their star, the tactical officer added, voice filled with disbelief. It's not complete, but it appears to be a partial Dyson swarm. Thousands of solar collectors funneling energy to the inner planets. Dr. Nash felt his confidence crumbling. A Dyson swarm required technology and resources that most Council species didn't achieve until they'd been members for centuries. How had humanity built this independently in just a few decades? Captain, we have a problem, the sensor operator announced. Multiple ships converging on our position. They're using a search pattern. I think they detected us. Impossible. This stealth system is perfect. We've used it to observe 100 species without detection. They're adjusting course directly toward us, sir. I recommend immediate withdrawal. Before Dr. Nash could give the order, his communications panel activated. A human voice spoke in flawless galactic standard. Council vessel Silent Observer. You are in violation of restricted space. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. They knew the ship's name. They had detected not just the vessel, but identified it specifically. Dr. Nash made a decision that would haunt him later. Activate emergency jump. Get us out of here. The ship's jump drive spooled up, but before it could engage, something struck the hull. Not a weapon, but a device that attached magnetically. Dr. Nash watched in horror as it began drilling through their armor. They're breaching us, his security chief reported. Multiple entry points. Captain, how are they moving so fast? The boarding process took less than 3 minutes. The human Marines who entered the Silent Observer moved with precision that spoke of extensive training. They wore powered armor that enhanced their already impressive physical capabilities. Their weapons, while crude by Council standards, were clearly effective. Dr. Nash and his crew were secured in their own cargo bay while the humans systematically accessed every computer system on the ship. They copied everything: intelligence files, personnel records, technical specifications, communications logs. Decades of Council secrets downloaded in hours. A human officer, identified only as Commander Reeves, addressed Dr. Nash directly. We're going to release you and your ship. You're going to return to the Council and deliver a message. What message? Dr. Nash asked, his pride wounded by how easily they had been captured. Reeves gestured, and a holographic display activated, showing what appeared to be a complete map of Council space. Hundreds of worlds, thousands of ships, all their positions marked with frightening accuracy. We know where everything is, Reeves explained. Every Council world, every fleet position, every trade route. We've had ships in your space for 30 years, watching, mapping, learning. Your stealth technology? We reverse engineered it a decade ago and improved it. Your weapons? We've tested countermeasures for all of them. Your tactical doctrines? We've run 10,000 simulations. Dr. Nash felt sick. Why are you telling me this? Because we want you to understand something fundamental, Reeves continued. You think you're the pinnacle of galactic civilization because you've had peace for so long. But peace makes you soft. It makes you predictable. You've forgotten how to fight, how to compete, how to innovate under pressure. And you haven't? Reeves laughed, but there was no humor in it. Captain, humanity has never known true peace. Even now, unified under one government, we compete internally. Our corporations fight for market share. Our nations maintain separate military traditions. Our scientists race each other for discoveries. We argue, we challenge, we push each other constantly. It makes us chaotic, but it also makes us dangerous. The Council will not accept this, Dr. Nash warned. You cannot stand against thousands of worlds. We don't want to stand against anyone, Reeves replied. We just want to stand apart. Take our message back, leave us alone, and we'll leave you alone. Try to force us into your collective, and you'll discover that humanity is very good at breaking things we don't want. The Silent Observer was released with its crew unharmed but thoroughly humiliated. As Dr. Nash jumped back to Council space, he reviewed the data the humans had returned to them. Data showing just how much humanity had infiltrated Council territory they had been watching for 40 years. Learning, preparing. And the Council had never suspected a thing. When Dr. Nash presented his findings to the Council, the response was divided. Half wanted immediate war, viewing humanity as an existential threat. The other half urged caution, pointing out that a species capable of such extensive intelligence operations might have defenses they couldn't imagine. The debate raged on, but one thing became clear to everyone in that chamber. The galaxy had changed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Council faced a species that was not only unwilling to join but potentially capable of resisting them. And that terrified them more than they were willing to admit. Ambassador Thelrax refused to accept the Council's growing hesitation. In his private chambers aboard the Council's central station, he convened a secret meeting with representatives from 12 of the most militaristic member species. They gathered in shadows and whispers, united by a common belief that humanity represented an unacceptable challenge to the established order. The Council grows weak, Thelrax declared, his four arms gesturing emphatically. They debate and discuss while these primitives mock everything we have built. If the full Council will not act, then we must. General Krath of the Sethian Armada nodded his massive head, scales rippling with anticipation. My fleet stands ready. 3,000 ships, all battle-hardened from the border conflicts with the Harask. We can crush these humans in a matter of days. Commander Vilthara of the Nexian Order, whose species had perfected warfare into an art form over 6,000 years, was more cautious. Dr. Nash's report troubles me. How did they infiltrate Council space so thoroughly? What other surprises might they have prepared? Fear. Thelrax dismissed the concern with a wave. The humans have you frightened with tricks and theatrics. Yes, they caught one intelligence vessel. Yes, they claim to have infiltrated our territory, but claims are easy. Victory requires more than boasts. The group debated for hours, eventually agreeing on a plan. They would assemble a coalition fleet from their respective militaries, launch a surprise attack on the human home world, and present the Council with a fait accompli. Once Earth was under occupation, humanity would have no choice but to submit, and the Council would be forced to accept the new reality. Within 2 months, they had assembled the largest attack fleet seen in modern galactic history, 5,000 warships, including 300 of the massive Dreadnought-class vessels that served as the backbone of Council military power. Each Dreadnought could lay waste to an entire continent. Together, they represented enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. They jumped into the solar system at coordinates, calculated to place them within striking distance of Earth. General Krath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the undeniable Victory, anticipating the swift conquest that would restore proper order to the galaxy. Instead, they jumped into a trap that had been waiting for months. The human defense grid activated the moment the fleet emerged from jump space. Thousands of satellites hidden among the orbital debris and disguised as civilian infrastructure revealed themselves as weapon platforms. But these weren't the crude missiles that had disabled Vexthar's escort ship. These were sophisticated directed energy weapons, railguns and mass drivers that opened fire in perfect coordination. Krath barely had time to process the attack before his shields began failing. The weapons were hitting them from every angle, each shot precisely targeted at known weak points in Council ship designs. His tactical officer screamed warnings about hull breaches, system failures, and cascading damage. "Return fire," Krath ordered. All ships engaged defensive formations, but the Coalition fleet was in chaos. The formation that looked perfect for attacking a planet was vulnerable to the distributed defense network humanity had deployed. Ships collided with each other trying to maneuver. Overlapping shield fields created interference. The perfect military coordination that Council species prided themselves on collapsed in the face of an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. Then the human fleet arrived. They didn't jump in majestically like the Coalition forces. They simply appeared, hundreds of ships emerging from stealth at point-blank range. The humans had been there all along, waiting invisible among the debris and civilian traffic. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the tactical channel, broadcasting on frequencies the Coalition didn't even know existed. "Coalition forces, you have entered Earth space with hostile intent. Power down your weapons and prepare to be escorted from the system." "Never," Krath roared back. "You are outnumbered 5-1. Your primitive ships cannot stand against dreadnoughts that have conquered 100 worlds." "Actually, we're not outnumbered," Chen replied calmly. "You're surrounded." Krath's sensors suddenly detected something impossible. Ships were emerging from the lunar surface, rising from bases hidden beneath craters. More were launching from Mars, from the asteroid belt, from stations orbiting Jupiter. And stranger still, massive installations were activating around the sun itself. Sections of the partial Dyson swarm Drenash had reported reconfiguring into weapons platforms. The human forces didn't outnumber the Coalition. They overwhelmed them with positioning and preparation. Every piece of civilian infrastructure, every mining facility, every research station had been designed with dual purposes. The humans had turned their entire solar system into a weapons platform. "This is impossible," Vilthara transmitted from her command ship. "No species builds their entire civilization around military readiness. The economic cost would be prohibitive." "You don't understand humans," Chen responded, and now there was steel in his voice. "We don't build military into our civilization. War is our civilization. We've been fighting each other for our entire history. The only thing that changed is that we stopped fighting each other and started preparing to fight you." The battle that followed lasted 3 hours and shattered every assumption the Coalition forces held about modern warfare. The humans didn't engage in the traditional exchanges of fire that characterized Council conflicts. They swarmed, using their numerical advantage and superior positioning to isolate and destroy larger vessels. Their tactics were brutal and efficient. They targeted life support systems, not shields. They used kinetic weapons traveling at relativistic speeds, not energy weapons that shields could deflect. They deployed swarms of small drones that attached to hull plating and drilled through to critical systems. Most shocking of all, they used nuclear weapons. The Council had banned such primitive devices millennia ago as crude and dangerous. Humanity had refined them into tactical weapons that could punch through, shields and armor that had been designed to resist more sophisticated attacks. General Krath watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. The undeniable victory, his mighty flagship, was crippled by a dozen small human corvettes that worked in perfect coordination to overload his shield generators before launching a salvo of missiles that crippled his main engines. "All ships, retreat," Krath ordered, his pride shattered. "Emergency jump to Rally Point Delta." But jumping away wasn't simple when you were surrounded. The humans had deployed jump inhibitors throughout the combat zone, requiring ships to maneuver to safe jump points before they could escape. Many didn't make it. By the time the surviving Coalition forces regrouped in neutral space, they had lost over 1,500 ships. Another 1,000 were heavily damaged. The humans had not lost a single vessel. Commander Reeves, the human officer who had captured Dr. Nash, was the one who transmitted the final message to the fleeing fleet. "Go back to your council. Tell them what happened here. Tell them that humanity has been preparing for this since we learned of their existence. Tell them that we studied every battle the Council ever fought, learned from every conflict in their history, and designed our entire military doctrine around defeating them specifically." "Why?" Krath asked, his voice broken. Why go to such extremes just to remain independent? Because freedom is worth any cost, Reeves replied simply. And because we learned a long time ago that if you want peace, you have to be too dangerous to attack. The council thought they could rule us because they'd never met anyone who couldn't be ruled. Now they have. The survivors returned to council space carrying news that would shake galactic civilization to its foundation. The mighty coalition fleet, assembled from 12 of the council's most martial species, had been defeated by a single species that had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. When Thelrax presented his report to the full council, there was no celebration of his initiative, no praise for his bold action. Instead, there was condemnation. His secret fleet had been crushed, and with it the illusion of council military supremacy. Councillor Indara addressed the assembly with words that many felt but few had dared speak. Perhaps the question is not how to make humanity submit, but why we insist they must. They ask only to be left alone. They threaten no one who does not threaten them. Why can we not simply grant them what they desire? Because it sets a precedent, Thelrax replied, though his voice lacked its former conviction. If others see that resistance is possible, our entire structure could collapse. Maybe, Myrinth interjected, their crystalline form pulsing with thoughtful colors. Our structure needs to evolve. The council was built on the principle that unity brings peace. But what if we have confused unity with conformity? What if there is room in this galaxy for a species that chooses its own path? The debate continued, but something fundamental had shifted. The council had always assumed their way was the only way, that any species would naturally want to join their collective once they understood its benefits. Humanity had proven that assumption wrong. More troubling still, humanity had demonstrated that the council's military might, unchallenged for 10,000 years, was based on obsolete technology, and news of humanity's victory spread through council space like wildfire, carried by merchants, diplomats, and soldiers who had witnessed or heard of the battle. The official reports were restricted to council members, but whispers traveled faster than official channels. Within weeks, every species in the galaxy knew that the mighty coalition fleet had been destroyed. On the agricultural world of Planara, a farming community gathered in their central meeting hall to discuss the implications. The Planar were a peaceful species, content with their role providing food to their sector. They had joined the council 300 years ago without hesitation, grateful for the protection and markets it provided. But Elder Tamresh, who had studied history as a young scholar before choosing the farming life, asked a question that many Planar had been thinking. If the humans can refuse the council, why can't we? The hall fell silent. Such a question bordered on heresy. Finally, another elder spoke. We need the council. We have no military, no way to defend ourselves. The humans had no military either 40 years ago, Tamresh pointed out. They built one because they knew they needed it. What if we have been so dependent on council protection that we have forgotten how to protect ourselves? Similar conversations were happening on hundreds of worlds. Species that had never questioned council authority were suddenly wondering if they had traded too much freedom for security. The council noticed the shift and grew concerned. High Counselor Myrinth called an emergency session, not to discuss military action against humanity, but to address the growing unrest among member species. We face a crisis of confidence, Myrinth announced. Member worlds question whether council membership is voluntary or compulsory. We must address this. Ambassador Thelrax, his influence diminished after the failed military action, argued for a firm response. We should make an example. Show that leaving the council is not an option. That would only prove the doubters right, countered Councillor Indara. If we are truly a voluntary alliance, we must accept that members can choose to leave. If we are not, we should stop pretending and govern honestly as the empire we have become. The debate revealed deep divisions within the council leadership. Some genuinely believed in the cooperative ideals that had founded the council. Others had grown comfortable with the power that came from managing thousands of worlds and trillions of beings. The latter group saw humanity's defiance as an existential threat to their authority. While the council debated, humanity was not idle. Admiral Chen understood that their military victory had bought them time, not security. A defeated enemy could regroup, learn, and return stronger. The key to permanent independence was changing the game entirely. Earth's diplomatic corps, which had been training in secret for decades, began making contact with individual council species. Not through official channels, but through back channels that the Council's intelligence network had failed to monitor. They reached out to the dissatisfied, the questioning, and the curious. Dr. Sarah Martinez led the diplomatic initiative from a converted cargo ship that served as humanity's covert embassy. She made contact with the planner first, knowing that agricultural worlds were often overlooked in council politics. "We're not trying to destroy the council," Martinez explained in a private meeting with Elder Tom Resch on a neutral station. "We're just offering an alternative, a trade alliance that doesn't require surrendering sovereignty, a mutual defense pact that respects independence, a different way of relating to other species." Tom Resch was intrigued but cautious. The council would never allow it. They would see it as rebellion. "Only if we ask permission," Martinez replied with a slight smile. "We learned long ago that it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. And honestly, after our recent military demonstration, we think the council will think twice before trying to force anyone to do anything." Over the following months, humanity quietly built a network of relationships with dozens of council species. They offered technology in exchange for resources, proposed joint research projects, and most importantly, demonstrated that galactic cooperation didn't require a monolithic governing structure. The Council's intelligence services eventually detected these activities and brought them to the full assembly's attention. The reaction was explosive. "This is exactly what we feared," Thelrax declared. "They are not content with independence. They seek to undermine the Council itself, to fracture our unity." "Or," Myrinth countered, "they are demonstrating that unity and diversity can coexist. Perhaps we should be asking why so many of our members are interested in what humanity offers." Diplomat Koresh proposed a direct approach. "Why don't we simply ask the humans what they want? Send a proper diplomatic mission, not a military fleet. Talk to them." The council agreed, though many members did so reluctantly. They selected a delegation led by Ambassador Felvin, known for his diplomatic skill and, more importantly, his genuine curiosity about other species. If anyone could understand humanity, it would be him. Felvin arrived at Earth aboard a small unarmed diplomatic vessel, following protocols that humanity had transmitted. He was granted permission to land at Geneva, where Earth's unified government maintained its headquarters. The city surprised him. He had expected something primitive, but Geneva was a marvel of architecture that blended natural beauty with advanced technology. Forests grew within the city itself, buildings rose alongside mountains, and the whole place hummed with energy that spoke of a thriving civilization. Admiral Chen and Dr. Martinez met him in a conference room that overlooked Lake Geneva. The simplicity of the setting disarmed Felvin. There was no throne room, no grand displays of power, just three beings sitting around a table ready to talk. "Thank you for coming," Chen began. "We know this isn't easy for the council." Felvin appreciated the directness. "You have caused considerable disruption, Admiral. Many council members view you as a threat to everything we have built." "We never wanted to be a threat," Martinez interjected. "We just wanted to be left alone." "But you're not leaving others alone," Felvin pointed out. "You're making contact with council species, offering them alternatives to council membership. Some see this as deliberately undermining our authority." Chen leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ambassador, can I be completely honest with you?" "Please do. We studied the council for 40 years before you knew we existed. We learned your history, your structure, your founding principles, and we discovered something troubling. The council was founded as a voluntary alliance of species seeking mutual benefit and protection. But over millennia, it evolved into something else, a system where membership is compulsory in practice, even if voluntary in theory." Felvin wanted to object, but found he couldn't. Everything Chen said was technically accurate. Martinez continued the thought. "When we make contact with other species, we're not trying to destroy the council. We're offering what the council used to offer, a choice. The fact that so many species are interested in talking to us suggests they feel they lack real choices within the current system." "So what do you propose?" Felvin asked. "A rival alliance? A split galaxy?" "Neither," Chen replied. "We propose that the council remember what it was supposed to be. A place for cooperation, not control. A forum for mutual benefit, not enforced conformity. Let species choose their level of involvement. Let some be full members, others associate members, and others completely independent. Create a galaxy where different approaches can coexist." Felvin sat back, considering the proposal. It was radical but not unreasonable. You're asking the Council to fundamentally restructure itself. We're asking the Council to evolve, Martinez corrected. Species evolve. Civilizations evolve. Why shouldn't galactic institutions evolve too? The galaxy is changing whether the Council likes it or not. You can resist that change and face increasing conflict, or you can adapt and thrive. And if the Council refuses? Chen's expression hardened slightly. Then we continue building our alternative network. We continue offering species the choice you won't give them. And eventually, you'll find that the Council's authority exists only where people choose to recognize it. Authority without consent is just tyranny with better branding. Felvin spent 3 days on Earth, meeting with human leaders, touring their facilities, and observing their society. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization. Humans were chaotic in ways that Council species had engineered out of themselves. They argued constantly, competed fiercely, and seemed incapable of the harmonious cooperation that Council species prized. Yet somehow that chaos produced innovation at a rate that left Felvin breathless. He visited research facilities where teams from different nations competed to solve the same problems, each pushing the others to work harder and think more creatively. He attended a session of Earth's Parliament, where representatives shouted and debated with a passion that would have been considered uncivilized in council chambers. He toured universities where students were encouraged to question everything, even their professors' teachings. "You're so inefficient," Felvin observed during a dinner with Martinez. "All this competition and conflict. The Council achieves consensus and works together." 5 years after the Council reforms, the galaxy had transformed in ways few could have predicted. The restructuring had created 3 distinct categories of participation: core members who maintained full integration with Council governance, associate members who collaborated on specific initiatives while retaining sovereignty, and independent partners who cooperated through bilateral agreements without formal Council affiliation. Humanity had chosen independent partner status, as had 17 other species inspired by their example. The Plenar were among the first to transition from core to associate membership, eager to maintain their agricultural trade networks while gaining more control over their local affairs. On the Council station, Ambassador Felvin met regularly with representatives from various species to facilitate the new system. The transition had been rocky at first, with many core members viewing the changes as betrayal of sacred principles. But gradually, even the skeptics began to see benefits. Species that had felt marginalized within the old structure found their voices mattered more in the new one. Innovation increased as different governance models competed and learned from each other. Most surprisingly, the Council's overall influence grew rather than diminished, as species that had resented compulsory membership became enthusiastic voluntary participants. Felvin's latest meeting was with a delegation from the Creche, a warrior culture that had chafed under Council restrictions on military development. They had been among the most resistant to joining originally and had remained troublesome members for centuries. "We wish to transition to associate membership," their leader, War Chief Drenkar, announced. "The new structure allows us to maintain our martial traditions while still participating in galactic commerce and diplomacy." Felvin approved the request, noting how different this conversation was from discussions 5 years ago. Then such a request would have been seen as rebellion. Now it was simply species exercising the choices the reformed Council offered. After the Creche departed, Felvin's assistant, a young Zorvathi named Siltar, asked a question. "Ambassador, do you ever wonder if we gave up too much power?" "Power that exists only through coercion is not real power," Felvin replied. "It is merely force waiting to be challenged." The old Council had force. The new Council is building something more lasting. Genuine cooperation based on mutual benefit rather than fear of consequences. Meanwhile, humanity continued to surprise the galaxy. Having secured their independence and catalyzed Council reform, they threw themselves into exploration and innovation with characteristic intensity. Commander Sarah Chen, Admiral Chen's daughter and a rising star in Earth Space Command, led an expedition to the Galactic Rim, an area the Council had largely ignored due to its distance from major trade routes. What her fleet discovered would shake the foundations of galactic understanding once again. They found ruins. Not just any ruins, but the remains of a civilization that predated the Council by millennia. The structures were massive, built with technology that made current council advancements look primitive. And there were signs that this ancient civilization had spanned thousands of worlds before mysteriously vanishing. Commander Chen immediately contacted the council, sharing her findings and requesting a joint research mission. It was an olive branch showing that humanity valued cooperation even while maintaining independence. High Counselor Mirinth personally led the council's response team. When they arrived at the ruins, even Mirinth's usually calm crystalline form pulsed with excitement. "This changes everything we thought we knew about galactic history." "That's why we called you," Commander Chen replied. "This is too important for any one species to claim. It belongs to the galaxy." Working together, human and council scientists began excavating the ruins and translating the ancient records they found. The story that emerged was sobering. The ancient civilization, which they called the predecessors, had built a galactic empire remarkably similar to the old council structure. They had achieved peace through unity, bringing thousands of species under single governance. They had eliminated war, standardized technology, and created what they believed was the ultimate form of galactic civilization, and it had destroyed them. The records showed that the predecessors' enforced stability had eliminated the competitive pressures that drove innovation. When they encountered an external threat, an extragalactic invasion force with technology they had never imagined, they had no defense. Their rigid, centralized system couldn't adapt quickly enough. Their subject species, having lost the ability to think independently, couldn't respond creatively to novel threats. The predecessors had been wiped out in less than a generation, along with thousands of species they governed. Only scattered ruins remained as testament to their existence. Dr. Marcus Webb, humanity's lead xenoarchaeologist on the project, presented the findings to a joint session of human and council leadership. The parallels are striking. The old council was following the same path as the predecessors. Stability achieved through conformity, peace maintained through control. It worked for millennia, but it was building toward the same vulnerability. Mirinth's colors shifted to dark blue, indicating deep concern. "You're saying the old system would have eventually led to our extinction?" "Not necessarily," Webb clarified. "But it made you vulnerable in ways you didn't recognize. The predecessors' records show they had warning signs, subject species asking for more autonomy, complaints about stagnation, calls for reform. They ignored all of it because their system had worked for so long." Ambassador Felvin, who had joined the briefing via holographic link, spoke up. "The humans did us a favor we didn't know we needed. By forcing us to reform, they may have saved us from the predecessors' fate." "We didn't know about the predecessors when we challenged the council," Admiral Chen admitted. "We just knew that freedom was worth fighting for, and that any system based on coercion would eventually fail. Apparently, galactic history agrees with us." The discovery led to intense scholarly debate across the galaxy. Some argued that the predecessors' failure proved that unity was dangerous. Others contended that they simply hadn't achieved enough unity. But most scholars converged on a middle ground. Diversity was strength, and any civilization that eliminated it risked catastrophe. The Kresh war chief Drenkar put it most bluntly during a council assembly. The predecessors tried to make everyone the same. They succeeded. Then something different came along and nobody knew how to handle it because they had forgotten how to think differently. The humans reminded us that different is not dangerous. Identical is dangerous. This philosophy began permeating council policy. Research initiatives that had been centralized were diversified, with different species taking different approaches to the same problems. Military doctrine, which had been standardized, was decentralized to allow varied tactical traditions. Even governance structures were allowed to vary more between council worlds. Humanity watched these changes with satisfaction, but also with continued vigilance. Commander Reeves, now promoted to general, oversaw human intelligence operations that continued monitoring galactic developments. "We changed the game," Reeves reported to Earth Security Council, "but we can't assume the game stays changed. There are still factions within the council who resent the reforms. Still species who think the old way was better. We need to remain prepared." "Prepared for what?" asked one of the council members. "We've won," the council reformed. "We're independent and respected." "Prepared for complacency," Reeves replied. "The same complacency that weakened the old council and destroyed the predecessors. The moment we assume we're safe is the moment we become vulnerable. That's not paranoia. That's just history, Admiral Chen agreed. We didn't fight for independence so we could rest. We fought for the freedom to keep pushing ourselves, to keep innovating, to keep being uncomfortable and chaotic and competitive. The day humanity becomes comfortable is the day we stop being human. This philosophy drove continued human expansion and development. They established colonies in uncharted regions, pushed the boundaries of technology, and maintained a military force that, while not aggressive, remained formidable. Other species noticed and some followed suit, creating a new dynamic in galactic civilization. The Plenar, inspired by humanity's example, began developing their own defense forces instead of relying entirely on Council protection. The scientific community of Velen, which had been content working on Council-approved projects, started pursuing radical research the old Council would have discouraged. 5 years after the reforms, Ambassador Felvin prepared a comprehensive report on their impact. The data was remarkable. Technological innovation had increased by 300%. Species satisfaction with Council membership had risen dramatically. Even economic indicators showed improvement as different systems competed and learned from each other. But the most significant change was psychological. Species across the galaxy were rediscovering something they had lost over millennia of Council governance: agency. The feeling that their choices mattered, that they controlled their own destinies, that they were not merely subjects of a greater power, but participants in a grand collaboration. 20 years after humanity's first contact with the Galactic Council, the galaxy had settled into a new rhythm. The reforms that had seemed radical at first became the new normal. Young species joining the galactic community now had options that previous generations never imagined. The Council had evolved from a monolithic governing body into a flexible framework for cooperation. But the galaxy never stays quiet for long. The warning came from the furthest edge of explored space. A deep space monitoring station operated jointly by humans, and the Veleni detected something impossible: a massive fleet entering the galaxy from intergalactic space. The vessels used technology that didn't match any known civilization. Their course was direct, purposeful, and heading toward Council space. Commander Sarah Chen, now an admiral herself, was the first to recognize what they were facing. She had studied the predecessor ruins extensively and recognized design elements in the approaching ships. These might be the same species that destroyed the predecessors, she reported to both Earth Command and the Council, or their descendants. Either way, they're using technology 10,000 years more advanced than what destroyed an empire that was already more sophisticated than we are. The news hit the Council like a shockwave. High Counselor Myrinth convened an emergency session, inviting independent partners like humanity to participate fully. The chamber that had once been a symbol of enforced unity now became a forum for genuine collaboration. Ambassador Thelrax, older now and humbled by 2 decades of changed reality, was the first to speak. We faced the scenario the predecessors faced: an external threat with superior technology. How do we avoid their fate? By being what they were not, Admiral Chen replied, participating via holographic projection from his flagship. Diverse, adaptive, willing to try unconventional approaches. The predecessors had one way of doing things. We have thousands. The debate that followed was unlike anything the old Council would have permitted. Representatives proposed wildly different strategies: military confrontation, diplomatic contact, strategic withdrawal, guerrilla resistance, technological crash programs, and combinations thereof. Instead of arguing for consensus, they argued for the freedom to pursue multiple approaches simultaneously. Myrinth crystallized the strategy: we don't know what will work, so we try everything. Council core worlds will fortify and prepare for defense using traditional doctrine. The Kresh and other warrior cultures will develop asymmetric warfare tactics. Humanity and the innovative species will focus on rapid technological development. The planar and agricultural worlds will ensure our supply lines are resilient. Different approaches, one goal: survival. It was chaos compared to the old Council's orderly consensus. It was also exactly what the situation required. Humanity threw itself into the technological race with characteristic intensity. The competitive spirit that had made them formidable now made them invaluable. 3 separate research teams pursued different approaches to countering the invaders' technology, each driven by the desire to succeed first. Dr. Emily, Zhang led a team at Mars Research Station working on quantum disruption, fields based on theories extracted from predecessor. Erwin's Dr. Jamal Hassan's group on Luna focused on weaponizing the same dimensional mathematics that enabled faster-than-light travel. And Dr. Kenji Nakamura's Earth-based team pursued something audacious, reverse engineering the invaders' technology from long-range scans. The teams shared information but competed fiercely for breakthroughs. This approach baffled Council scientists who had been trained in collaborative, consensus-driven research. But it produced results at a pace that left them stunned. Within 6 months, Zhang's team achieved a breakthrough. They created a field that could momentarily disrupt the exotic matter the invaders used for shielding. It wasn't perfect, but it gave conventional weapons a chance to damage ships that had seemed invulnerable. Hassan's team took a different approach, developing missiles that could briefly shift into higher dimensions to bypass shields entirely. The technology was unstable and dangerous, but in testing it proved devastatingly effective. Nakamura's team made the most startling discovery. By analyzing the invaders' hull materials through advanced spectroscopy, they realized the ships were not entirely technological. They were partially biological, grown rather than built. This suggested vulnerabilities that purely mechanical vessels wouldn't have. While humanity focused on technology, the Kresh war chief Drenkar assembled warriors from a dozen martial cultures to develop new tactical doctrines. They studied every guerrilla war, every asymmetric conflict, every instance of a weaker force defeating a stronger one throughout galactic history. "We cannot match their strength," Drenkar explained to his diverse coalition. But strength is not everything. The predecessors were strong, they lost. We must be smart, adaptable, and willing to fight in ways our enemy does not expect. The Kresh developed hit-and-run tactics using small, fast ships. The Scythian Armada pioneered new formation strategies that maximized their numerical advantage. The humans contributed concepts from their own history, guerrilla warfare, insurgency tactics, and the philosophy of making victory too costly for the enemy to achieve. Meanwhile, Ambassador Felvin led the diplomatic effort to contact the invaders. If they could be reasoned with, perhaps war could be avoided. His ship, escorted by vessels from a dozen species, approached the invader fleet under a flag of truce recognized throughout the galaxy. The invaders' response was swift and brutal. They destroyed the escorts without warning and captured Felvin's ship intact. For 3 days, there was no word. Then Felvin was released, his ship returned damaged but functional. His report to the Council was grim. "They call themselves the Harvesters. They don't see us as civilizations to negotiate with. They see us as resources to be collected. They showed me processing facilities where they break down biological matter, technology, even planetary crusts for raw materials. They have been doing this to galaxy after galaxy for millions of years." "Did they say why?" Miranth asked, colors pulsing with barely controlled fear. "They evolved in a dying galaxy," Felvin explained. "Rather than accept extinction, they became nomadic, moving from galaxy to galaxy, consuming everything in their path and moving on. They view it as survival, not conquest. They are not evil by their own understanding. They simply see all other life as fuel for their continued existence." The revelation was chilling but also clarifying. There would be no negotiation, no compromise, no diplomatic solution. The Harvesters would consume everything or be stopped. Those were the only options. Admiral Chen proposed a strategy that drew on everything humanity had learned about asymmetric warfare. "We can't defend everything. They have too many ships, too much firepower. But we don't need to defend everything. We need to make them pay an unacceptable price for what they take." The strategy was brutal in its simplicity. Evacuate vulnerable worlds, booby-trap what remained, and make every system they entered a battlefield on the defenders' terms. Use the Harvesters' size against them by forcing them to fight in asteroid fields, nebulae, and other terrain that negated their numerical advantage. Strike their supply lines, their processing facilities, their forward bases. "We make them bleed," Chen explained. "Every resource they spend conquering us is a resource they don't have for the next galaxy. We make victory here so costly that they'll consider moving on to easier targets." The Council species, even those who had once prioritized peace above all, recognized the necessity. They began the largest military mobilization in galactic history, but it was different from the old Council's military actions. This was not about conquest or control. This was about survival, and every species fought in their own way while coordinating toward common objectives. The first major engagement came at the Helios system, a human colony that served as a testing ground for their new defensive strategies. Admiral Sarah Chen commanded the defense, using a mixture of conventional forces and the new technologies her species had developed. The harvesters entered the system with overwhelming force. 500 massive warships, each kilometers long and bristling with weapons that could sterilize planets. They expected to crush any resistance and begin processing the system's resources within days. Instead, they found a nightmare. The human fleet was smaller, but it fought with a coordination and ferocity that caught the harvesters off guard. Zhang's quantum disruption fields created momentary vulnerabilities that conventional weapons exploited. Hassan's dimensional missiles bypassed shields to strike at vital systems. And Nakamura's team had developed biological agents that attacked the organic components of harvester vessels. More importantly, the humans didn't fight a traditional battle. They used the system itself as a weapon. Asteroids had been fitted with engines and directed toward harvester formations. Satellites that appeared to be civilian infrastructure revealed themselves as weapon platforms. Even the system's star was weaponized, with solar collection arrays redirecting massive energy streams toward enemy vessels. The Kresh joined the battle with their hit-and-run tactics, appearing from nowhere to strike at isolated ships before vanishing back into the system's numerous hiding.